In today's video, I'm going to be reviewing all of my travel watercolor palettes. I'm not going to be including my tiny palettes in that because I've already made a few different videos about that, and I'll link those in the description. And I'm also not going to be including what I would call my watercolor pochade boxes or my travel setups for watercolor because those are quite lengthy. And if you'd like a separate video about that, let me know in the comments and I can create one of those for you. Rather, today's video is just about the travel watercolor palettes that I would take with to go on vacation or holiday. And usually for me, that includes an airplane. So these are going to be heavily geared towards people who are traveling someplace on an airplane. Although I will talk a little bit about car travel as well, because obviously if you're traveling in a car, weight isn't as big of an issue. Welcome back. And if you're new here, welcome. I'm Leslie, an artist, illustrator, and former art professor, and I make videos about drawing, painting, and my painting adventures. I have many different watercolor palettes to show you in today's video. So to make things a little bit easier, I've broken them down into three general categories. The slim palettes, which are anything that's going to have a depth of less than ½ inch and are going to be more lightweight in nature. And then I have the chunkies, which are going to be palettes that are a little bit thicker and heavier and probably not great for airplane travel, but they are travel palettes, and so they have a place in this video. And then my third category will be the all-in-ones. So those will be the travel palettes that include a brush, a water reservoir, and a container for water. And I've made up my own little rating system where I'm going to be looking at a couple different categories. I'll be looking at the portability of the palette. I'll be telling you the dimensions and the relative weight of each of the palettes. And then I'll also be looking at the features and the functions, like does it easily attach to a travel easel, or are you going to need to do extra modifications to it for that to be accessible? And also the mixing capacities. So does it have mixing wells and what quality are those mixing wells? The categories that I'm going to give the palettes are gold for the ones that are my favorites, silver for the ones that are close but not my favorites, bronze for the ones that I probably would never travel with anymore, and coal for the ones that I would not recommend that you buy. Save your money and buy one of the other palettes instead. Please do remember that this video is just my opinion as an artist who likes to travel and likes to do plein air painting, and other artists may have different opinions. But hopefully my opinions can help you make an educated decision about the types of palettes that you would like to include in your own watercolor travel practice. And so with that said, let's get started. My first category are the slim palettes, and these are all going to be excellent for travel painting, whether you're painting plein air or just going on an airplane or even in a car. I'm going to rate all of these palettes by whether or not they're gold, silver, bronze, or coal. And the categories I'll be looking at is their portability, which will include their size, their weight, and their ability to fit into a carrying case. And then their features, and those will include whether or not they're magnetic or can be easily attached to some kind of a travel easel, the number of colors they can hold, and also their palette. For each of these palettes, I'm going to start by telling you the dimensions and also the weight. And keep in mind that the weight refers to the weight of my palettes that are already loaded up with paint. So it may vary slightly depending on how many colors you have in your palettes. This one is the Demi palette, and I hesitated about including it because it could be construed as a tiny palette because it's so little, but it does hold up to 12 colors. And if you were going away for a weekend or a very short trip, this would be excellent. You can literally put it in your shirt pocket. You could chuck it in your purse. You wouldn't even know that you had this with you. If you were traveling and you only had carry-on baggage, this is perfect. You could take a few postcards with this and it would be excellent. The weight of this one is 27 grams, and I'll be measuring them in inches, and I'll put the corresponding centimeters up in the corner for you on all of these palettes. This one is about 2¼ inches by 1¾ and the depth is about 1/4 inch, so really tiny. The mixing palette is in the lid, And I was a little bit nervous about being able to do washes with that, but it has these sides that keeps water from falling out or onto you. So it's actually been enough. And like I said, if you were going to travel and just have a few days or a few colors and you wanted something extremely lightweight, especially maybe you want to go on vacation and your purpose of the trip isn't to do art, but you might like to have the option to do it, this one is going to be your best friend. So for features on this one, and for all of the art toolkits, I would give it a gold. And for portability, I would give it a gold. So overall rating on this one is a gold. And I'm going to talk about these next two together because they're also made by Art Toolkit. And I do have another video on Art Toolkit that I'll link in the description and also up above if you're interested in learning more about these. This one is called the Pocket Palette. It's 54 grams. And it's about 3 3/4 inches by 2 1/4 inches. And the depth on these are the same, so about 1/4 inch. And then this one is about 5 1/4 inches long by 3 1/4 inches wide. And it has that same depth of about 1/2 inch. I always have a color chart in my favorite palettes. The weight on this one is 117 grams. Keep in mind, I have mine completely loaded up. The thing that I love about these palettes is that they're so customizable. And they all have this ledge on the side so that they'll hold water. They all have a mixing palette in the lid, but you also have these other pans that you can add. They have this size, they even have a larger size. And you can include them in the palette if you want extra mixing space, or if you like to paint with a lot of washes and you want a lot of water in your mixing wells, you can add these to your palette. I find that I'm not using them as much as I thought I would because I am able to do quite a lot of mixing on the lid. There's a magnet on the bottom and all of the pans are magnetic. So you can put them in there, you can swap them around, you can do any kind of configuration that you'd like. And if you decide you don't want a color, you can just take it out and replace it. You can change things at a whim, and I love that about this palette. You can see a little bit better on this one, but they have a very thin ledge on the bottom. And that makes them different than a lot of the similar palettes to this as well that have a deeper lid, and then you actually lose mixing space because there's a ledge that is up too high. I've loved painting with these. They've been a real revelation to me, and they both fit really nicely in my art wrap. So I would give these a gold in portability and a gold in their features. So all of the Art Toolkit palettes are going to be in the gold status to me. The next palette is called Nomadic Artist, and I don't even know if this is available anymore. This was available to me in the UK on Amazon. It was about £20. I bought it a long time ago. I've never actually used it. It's similar to the Art Toolkit, but the lid doesn't have the ledge on the side. This lip is taller, so you actually will lose part of the mixing space. And it's not as customizable. It only comes with this size pan. And you can change the way that you rotate them, but you can't change the sizes, and they also don't have any separate mixing wells. If this was all you had access to, I think it's decent. The weight on this one is 52 grams. The length is 3 3/4. The width is 2 1/4, and the depth is 1/2 inch. And it is magnetic, so it would hold up nicely on a plein air easel. If this was all you had access to, it's a decent palette. It's thin, it's going to fit into your packs quite easily. Again, it's very portable for travel. I'm not sure how this mixing well will hold up. It's probably decent. But the fact that it doesn't have the sides means you can't really do any washes on this. And it doesn't come with any extra pans that you could add to it to do washes. So to me, that's a big negative. And so for features, I would give this one a bronze. For portability, it would be a gold. And overall, I would rate this one as a silver. If I didn't have access to the Art Toolkit, I would probably rate it higher, but the Art Toolkit does it so much better that you're better off investing in this one, in my opinion. The next one is this Keep Calm in Watercolor, which came from Natsume Handmade on Etsy. And again, it's very similar. It is a business card type of a palette. This mixing well on the lid hasn't held up really well, although it does come with some replacement stickers that you could take off and replace. And again, it doesn't have the edge. This one also doesn't have separate pans, so you fill this up and then you can't change anything around. It does come with a deeper mixing well on the inside, which is nice. But again, it has this whole area that you miss out on. The plastic insert is made to fit that. I've had to attach mine with some little white tack because otherwise it slid down in there. It slid down like that. And so the white tack helps keep it in place. And I liked this because it gave me access to some other colors that if I was out plein air painting, especially doing a tiny painting, if I would see a custom unusual color, this wouldn't take up much space and I could add it with that. But I haven't really used it as much. I don't like that it's plastic and that I can't easily change out the pans. And if I'm comparing it again to the Art Toolkit, its features are not for me. The weight of this one is 40 grams, so it's a little bit lighter. The length is 3 3/4, the width is 2 1/4, and the depth is about 1/2 inch. However, this one is made out of aluminum, so it's not magnetic. So if you're going to want to attach this to some kind of a plein air setup, you're going to need to use a clip. All of those things to me, the fact that it's plastic and I can't change things around, that it has this wasted space down here, really make it pale in comparison to the Art Toolkit. And this is not an ad for the Art Toolkit. I'm not being sponsored by Art Toolkit for this. But in my opinion, the price of this one is about the same as the Art Toolkit. So for me, it's a no-brainer. So for features on this one, I would give it a coal because I really don't like that this is plastic and that it's not magnetic. And it's very cute. This is cute, but I could get a sticker and put that on my Art Toolkit and have the same saying. So that alone does not make it worth it. Portability, it's a gold, but I think when I compare it to the other palettes that are similar, I'd give this one a coal, I'm sorry to say. Maybe a bronze if I was being really generous. Again, if you're traveling on an airplane where weight is an issue, or you're moving around a lot and you don't want to bring a lot of luggage, these are definitely going to be the gold star, even the categories that I don't like as much. They fit really well into an art kit. If you decide you don't have time to paint at all, you're not going to feel like you sacrificed space. So in terms of that, these are all quite good. So I'm going to move on now to a few others that are in the slim category. This one is called the Tilda. It's made by Peg and All, and it was inspired by the Egyptian ivory palettes. It's made of maple and vegetable tanned leather, and it has space for 6 different colors. This one was designed by Peg and All to easily fit into their Sundak art wraps, and so for that, I really appreciate it because I still have plenty of other space when I'm traveling, and I can take this along. In fact, I took this one when I visited my mother in the US this past spring, and I loved having it with me. It is a bit longer. It's about 7.5 inches long, but the width is just shy of 1.5 inches, and the depth is less than 1/2 inch. And the weight on this palette, when it's completely filled up, is about 50 grams. So it still is quite slim and lovely. I love the features of it, that even though you only have 6 colors, they are all full-sized. So you could paint larger paintings with this quite easily. And it held up pretty well when I was painting. It didn't shift around. A downside of this palette is that it doesn't have a mixing well. So in a way that's good because it could force you to do mixing on the paper or mixing on your brush, and it might give you the opportunity to explore a different style. But in general, you're going to want to have some kind of a palette, either one that you carry with you or just a ceramic plate that may be available to you wherever you're going. In terms of its features, I love that it's a limited palette. I prefer to paint with a limited palette anyhow, so that is not a problem for me. I wouldn't be using this on an airplane or probably out at a cafe unless I had an external palette with me. They do make other palettes that are similar to this that have a little mixing well in it. And you could carry an extra mixing well if it was that important to you. For me, this is one that I would bring more if I was staying at somebody's house or if I had a designated area to paint, or if I was going to be in a hotel room or a cottage or someplace for a long amount of time. And then I could set this up on a table and I could use it for paintings. You can also definitely use it for travel art, but I probably wouldn't personally. Simply because it doesn't have a mixing well included, I would probably rate this one as a silver, because that is a pretty important thing to have if you're travel painting. As a palette on its own, it would be a gold, but for a travel palette, I'd probably place it at a silver because it doesn't have a mixing well. But for its portability and the way that it fits so nicely into my art wrap, I'd give it a gold. So for me, this one is a blend of silver and gold, depending on where you're traveling and what your needs are. The next palette is made by Cass Art. It's a professional watercolor set. It came with this bag, which has a little magnetic flap, and that protects it. And then it also has this neat feature that if you pull the tab, it gently pulls the palette out. I thought I'd love that, but I actually find I prefer keeping the palette separate and not adding the extra bulk when I'm traveling. And I have brought this one to travel overseas as well because it fits really nicely in my art wrap. It keeps things very slim and I'm still able to fold everything up quite easily. I love the fact that it holds so many different colors. And these are not half pans, they're actually considered to be quarter pans. If you wanted to replace these, you would have to buy a half pan and cut them, or you could use some tubed watercolors and fill these little wells that way. This one came with a little brush, which is nice. And it has this nice mixing area here, so there's plenty of mixing that you can do. I love the fact that it holds 18 colors, and you can add some extras in the center if it was important to you. So again, this is one that you can easily take with you and do a lot of different paintings. It also has the thumb ring on the back. So if you wanted to paint and hold it in one hand, you could easily do that. The size on this one is about 4 3/4 length by about 2 inches, and the depth is less than ½ inch. And this one is also magnetic, so it would easily attach to any kind of magnetic strip. This one's a little bit tricky to find in the US. Cass Art is a UK company, and I don't think they ship overseas, but Daler Rowney makes a similar one for anybody who's interested. And I just like it. I like how thin it is. And again, that I'm able to fit all of these different professional watercolors. Before I had the art toolkits, this was the one that I wanted to bring. But I think when I go traveling next month, I'm probably going to leave this one at home. Maybe. We'll see. Stay tuned. I do really love it though. And the weight on this one, fully loaded, is 97 grams. And if I included the case, it brings it up to 127. So again, the case is nice. If you were car traveling and weight wasn't as much of an issue, it's nice to have the case. It is really fun. But for me, because of the way I load up my art wrap, I would opt to put it in the art wrap instead. So the features and the portability on this one, I would rate a gold. So overall rating on this one is a gold. This one is made by Cornelissen. Originally, it came with slots for 8 different colors, but this one has 12, and a sponge in the little leftover spot. It normally comes with channel pieces, but the person that I got it from on eBay had removed all of that, and I actually quite like the way it's set up. In fact, I even am still using the colors that it came with, which are M-gram watercolors. The length of this is 3 1/4 inches, and the width is 2 1/2, and the depth is a little bit over ½ inch. And the weight is 94 grams. So it's a little bit heavier, but this one comes also with the thumb ring, so you can easily hold it in your hand to paint. If you like that traditional idea of holding it in one hand and painting with the other, it's excellent. And these 2 mixing wells, I don't know how well it shows up on camera, but they're very deep. So you could actually include different washes in there. And so for such a small palette, I really like the mixing capacity. It's also magnetized, so if you wanted to attach it to something, it could easily do that. I would say the features on this one are a gold because, again, you can hold up to 12 different colors. It has deep mixing wells. It has the thumb ring on the back. It's just an overall lovely palette. Winsor & Newton used to make a similar one called a bijou box, and I don't know why they stopped making them because they're just so lovely. But this is the Cornelissen palette. The next category are what I am calling the chunkies, meaning that the depth of all of these is more than ½ inch. And I would consider these to be a little bit more of a commitment to travel with. I have traveled with these many, many times in the past before I had slimmer palettes, and they definitely contributed to the weight of my carry-on bag on airplanes. Again, if you're going to do car travel, these would definitely be ones that you might want to consider. But if you're traveling on an airplane, I would probably steer you more towards the slim palettes instead. So with that said, let's take a look at all of the different features. I'm going to start with these metal palettes, which I think are all sort of a classic palette. And they're all much of a muchness in terms of weight. They're all magnetic, so they'll stick to any kind of a travel setup that you have. And the weight on these is probably going to be similar as well. This one is made by Winsor & Newton, and I don't believe they're making this model anymore, but you can still find them used on eBay or at thrift stores. And this is one of my classic sort of limited palettes that I'll use for teaching, so I like to use this one for that. This one I purchased empty at an art store nearby when it was going out of sale, so it was actually quite inexpensive. It was about £6 at the time, and I completely have this one loaded up with some of my favorite Winsor & Newton colors. And then this one is a Meeden watercolor palette, and these come empty, although I think Meeden does now sell their own watercolors, but you can buy these empty. And for the most part, it looks similar to these other two, but I don't rate it, and I'll explain why in just a minute. I'm going to start by talking about the Schmincke palette. Forgive all the stains, those will be removed if I want them to. All of these palettes have a part in the center that you can lift out, and you could use the inside for some extra mixing if you needed it. Or you could bypass this piece altogether, and you could attach your paint with either magnets or some blue tack or white tack to the bottom. And I have done that in the past, but I find that I like the way that these metal inserts hold the paint pans in place a little better. But if weight is an issue and this is the only palette you had, you could consider that option. The reason I like the Schmincke is that it has 3 nice mixing wells in the lid as opposed to the 2 of the other ones. And I also like the way that this extra flap extends all the way down to the table, which makes mixing a lot easier. This one has been my favorite palette for a long time, and it's been on many overseas journeys with me as well as car journeys, and I will probably never bring it on a trip like that again because I have the Art Toolkit palettes now. But if I was going away for a really long time, like maybe a month or so, I would consider bringing it for sure. The length is about 5 inches and the width is about 2 3/4 inches. And the depth on this one is about 3/4 of an inch. And it does have the thumb ring or the finger ring, so you could easily hold it in one hand and have lots of mixing capacity. This is great for doing color charts because you can really put a lot of different mixes here. When I was new to watercolor and I really wasn't as skilled at mixing, these really came in handy for me. I don't use it so much anymore, but for a beginner, it's definitely a good feature to have. And the weight on this is 180 grams. Keep in mind that this one is completely loaded. If I put the more modest size in it, it would be 156 grams. So depending on how many paints you have in it, it will weigh more or less. The features on this are great. The weight and the size, however, are not. So for a travel palette, I would give this a silver. The weight on this Winsor & Newton is 154 grams, and it's very similar to the Schmincke. It has this panel that folds all the way down to the table so that any washes that you put in these little pans are going to stay put. And you can put again, more colors in this if you wanted to, and it has two nice deep mixing wells. I do like the fact that there's no writing in these mixing wells. The Schminke tends to get in the way of being able to see the colors, and the Meeden also has their title there, and I think nobody needs that when they're mixing colors. It's better to just see the pure white of the palette. And this one also has the finger ring. And like the Schminke, I would also give this one a silver. Now let's talk about the Meeden. It's a little bit larger at about 5 inches long, about 3 inches wide, and the depth on this one is again about 1/2 inch. So it's a little bit clunkier, but that's not why I don't like it. The reason that I don't like it is because this pan doesn't extend all the way down to the table. So if you're doing mixes in the lid, they're not going to stay neatly in the bottom. Any mixes that you do are going to be more likely to travel upwards, and I don't like that. I also don't think the metal is quite as nice. I mean, a nice thing about it is that it's budget friendly, but it's not that budget friendly when you consider the fact that it's not going to come with quality professional watercolor paints. So this one, even though it's a similar model, I would rate lower. And I would say the features, because of that palette extension, would be a bronze. And again, the portability on this is also a bronze. You can see it in comparison to the Schminke. It's just a lot chunkier. And that little bit of extra makes a big difference when you're traveling. So for traveling, this Meeden watercolor palette would be a bronze. This was the first watercolor travel palette set that I ever had. It's the Winsor Newton Cotman. This is not actually my original. My original is up in my tiny house, but this one's similar. And I still really love the design of this one. I'm not a big fan of plastic palettes normally, but it holds up to 12 colors. You can take the paint pans out and move them around or replace them quite easily. And I love that it has these 3 deep mixing wells. And it comes with a travel brush as well. I don't know if they still include this particular brush. I think they have a different kind of brush that they include with it. But it is nice that it comes with a brush and even a place to keep your brush. The size of this one is about 5 inches by 2.5 inches, and the depth is about 3/4 of an inch. And the weight on this is 88 grams, so it's a little bit lighter than the metal palettes. I don't use student watercolors anymore, but if you're a student or you're new to painting, this is a great little palette. It's really portable, it gives you plenty of mixing space, and it will give you a really nice introduction to painting. These are not the colors that they come with. I actually have a brand new one here that's never been opened, and these are more similar to the colors that they come with. But they have a cool and a warm yellow, a cool and a warm red, a cool and a warm blue, a couple greens, a couple of earth colors, and they give you white, which you probably don't need, but which you could replace with something else. So overall, I would rate this palette pretty well. I would give the features of this one a silver. The only reason I'm not giving it a gold is because it is plastic, but that might be a bonus to some people because of its lighter profile. But also if you wanted to attach it, there's no magnet to do that. So you would have to use a clip and attach it some other way or put a magnet on the palette itself. It's not going to come ready to go on a magnetic kind of a travel board. So the features on this one I would rate as a silver, and the portability also a silver. So this one is a solid silver. The next palette is made by Go Draw. And when it's closed, it's a little bit shy of 2 3/4 inches by 2 3/4 inches. And the weight is about 82 grams. So it's a little bit heavier than some of the others. You open it up and then you have a more rectangular profile. They are magnetized, but if you want a little more stability, you can use another clip to hold the two halves together and also to attach it to a sketchbook. It holds 15 different colors and has one big open mixing well. And this one is filled with dry gouache. So this is one of my dried gouache palettes. And I don't use it that often. I filled these up about 3 years ago and they're still in great shape. So I would highly recommend it for that. I I think it's a beautiful palette, especially as a gouache palette, because the colors tend to stay in their place a little bit more in the mixing well. It is a little bit clunkier, so I don't usually bring this one to travel if I was going to go on a car journey or on an airplane. But if I was going somewhere around town, I would definitely consider bringing this one. The downsides would be that it's just one big open mixing well, and for all of these colors and the thickness of it, it's not really that awesome for traveling. Also, it's not magnetized, so you'd have to clip it to a board or your sketchbook. But again, it's made to do that, so that's not really a detriment to me. So for the features on this one, I'd give it a silver because it's lacking a little bit in the mixing space. And for portability, I'd also give it a silver just because there are better options out there for traveling. But it is a lovely palette, so overall, I would give this one a silver. This next palette is made by Natsume Handmade, and it's called their Honeycomb palette. And you open it up, and the two sides connect with a magnet. They're not super secure, so in terms of being able to attach it to something, you might want to add a clip. However, they do have these magnets on the back, so if you're attaching it to a travel palette or some magnetic strip, it's going to hold really easily, unlike the square one from Go Draw. This one only holds 7 colors, and like the Go Draw, it has one open mixing well. I think it's charming, and for me, because it has these magnets on the back that make it really secure when it's attached to a travel easel, this one would definitely be a contender for me for that reason. And the length of this, if I go from side to side, is about 2¼ inches, and if I go from point to point, it's about 2¾ inches. And the weight is 54 grams. A nice feature about this one is that you can bring more than one. I have a few extras here. So if you wanted more colors, you could bring a second one. And you could attach them together like that. Or if you were happy with this amount of colors, but you wanted a little bit more mixing space, you could just take an extra mixing well and attach it to this. It is a little bit chunkier, so it's going to be more difficult to fit. And for that reason, I probably give it about a silver for its features because it doesn't hold as many colors and the mixing well is limited. But the portability on this, I would say, is probably a gold. So this one, again, would be in the silver gold category for me. And for the last of the chunkies, I have the Etchlab Mini, which was designed by the artist Stephanie Law. And this one comes in a nice little travel tin. I also have a video about this one, which I'll link if you're interested. It's about 3¼ inches, and the depth is just a little bit more than an inch. The weight, however, is going to come in at a hefty 206 grams, and that's filled with the paint, but even so, that's quite a heavy commitment. I would not bring this one on an airplane for travel. I might bring it in a car if I was going to a destination where I had a table available, where I could spread everything out quite easily. On the inside, you have a little palette. This one comes in 2 different sizes. Mine has 37 different wells, but they also make one with 19 wells if you want to bring fewer colors. And that actually might be more conducive for the average artist. It also comes with another ceramic palette that you can use for mixing your colors, and they're all divided by these nice soft pieces of felt. In terms of the magnet test, if I put one of these on the lid, I could attach it to a magnetic easel, but then I'd have the problem of the mixing wells being separate. If I had a really large one, I could attach them both. I probably wouldn't want to risk it though, because it is made of ceramic. So it's a little bit more delicate than the average travel palette. You could use this lid for water if you wanted to. So in that case, it has a lot of versatility. For me, if we're talking about traveling on an airplane, I would rate this one as a bronze, just because it's heavier, it's more delicate. It's not the kind of palette you're going to whip out just anywhere. You're going to want to be someplace a little bit more safe, and you're going to want to have a little bit more time to dedicate to painting to bring this palette. So the portability of this is definitely a bronze, but the features I would say are a gold. So overall, this would be a silver. And again, it would depend on where you were going, how you were traveling, and what kind of painting you were planning to do. My final category are the all-in-one palettes. And by all-in-one, I mean that they come with a place for the paint, for the brush, and for the water. I'm going to start with the portable painter because this one is a little bit borderline. It doesn't strictly fit into the all-in-one category, but it does have enough features to make it a contender. This is the Portable Palette Micro. They also make a regular portable painter. I have ordered that one. I don't know that I'm going to love it, but I thought I would try it out since I know a lot of people really do like theirs. The length of this is just shy of 3 inches. The width is about 2 1/4, and the depth is a little less than 1 inch. And the weight is 54 grams filled with paint. And the features of this one are that you open up the lid, and then on the inside you have the palette. And you lift the top, and you have 2 little mixing wells here. On the reverse side, you have this, it's not really a finger ring, but you can hold it between your hands quite comfortably if you want to paint with one hand free and your paints in the other. And then these 2 mixing wells attach to the side. They slide in. And then this part could function as a water pot, and it also has notches so that it can slide into the other side. So for such a small palette, when you open it up, there is a lot of depth. It does have this water container so that if you're wanting to paint, you can easily clean your brush there. I don't know that I love the size of the water container, but it is nice that it all is held together and that you have these 4 mixing wells that are quite deep, so you could do some washes easily in there. It holds up to 6 colors, although they do make inserts that mean that you can add more or less depending on what your preference is. And this one does not come with a place to hold the water, so you'll need to carry your water separately. And it also doesn't come with a place to hold your brush. So in that sense, it's not quite as all-in-one as the other 3 that I'm going to show you, but it is quite interesting. And to be honest, I have never used this because I had so many other palettes that arrived at the same time as this one that I fell in love with so much, and I just didn't really think that I would love this. So I have to be honest about that when I'm reading it because I never have used it. I would say the features are probably, I'm going to give it a bronze because I don't really like plastic palettes, and I don't like that this water container is so open. And I also find it personally a bit cumbersome. You know, sometimes it starts raining and you need to move, or there are cows in the field that start coming next to you and you need to just pack everything up quickly. And this one is not easy to put away. So for that reason, I'm going to give it a bronze for its features, but I will give it a gold for its portability because this is quite small. My overall rating would probably be about a bronze, maybe a silver on this one. And again, keep in mind, I haven't used it. So this is just going on my experiences with other palettes. I might rate it higher once I do use it. So stay tuned. The next one is the Winsor & Newton Field Box, and this one seems to charm everybody who sees it. It has a finger ring or a thumb ring there so you can hold it, and it has everything that you need on the inside, but it's quite a chunky, thick palette. It comes in at about 5 inches by 2.5 inches, if I count these parts on the side that stick out. And then the depth on this one is about 1 1/4 inches. So it's not going to fit comfortably in any kind of an art wrap. It's something that's always going to be separate. For me, that is a big detriment. The first time I saw this was probably about 15 years ago, and I absolutely loved the design and coveted it. I had my other Cotman Winsor & Newton palette at the time, and I wanted this one so badly. The lid comes off, and can double as your water pot. And then you open it up and you fold out these two palettes. It has a spot here for the tiniest brush in the world that you're probably never going to actually practically use with this palette, but it is nice that it's included. And then the water pot doubles as a palette, and you can take it out and you can put the water in the lid. And then you can put it back. And then the water pot has a notch there that fits onto this piece and holds everything into place. This palette comes with either professional paints or student grade paints, which make it a lot more affordable. And it comes with 12 colors. I've added 2 more over here, and you also have a sponge. You're seeing one of the things I don't like about it right away, which is that the water pot stands so high that it casts a shadow down on your paint, and I don't like that. I like to see what I'm painting as I'm painting it. The main thing I don't like is that these palettes are so flimsy. In fact, my daughter has the same palette and she really loved hers and used hers. And one of these side palettes on hers broke off. It really did not stand up well to the test of time. I also don't think these mixing wells are good for much. You certainly can maybe do a bit of a wash in this one, but they're not great. And you have to clean them off before you fold everything up, which is kind of true for any palette, but this one especially, you want to make sure that that's dry or it's going to contaminate all your paints. Like I said, I really coveted this one. I wanted it so bad, and I was so heartily disappointed by it. If you want an all-in-one palette, this is not the one I would recommend. It also never seems to fold perfectly. And this isn't just my version, it's every version of it that I've ever seen. So that's not great. This one is not going to easily attach to any external palette that you have. You could maybe rig something up this way, but again, it's so flimsy that I wouldn't recommend it. So for the most part, you're either going to be putting it on a table or holding it in one hand. So for me, these fiddly palettes that break easily, and the fact that it's so chunky that you can't really easily put it into an art bag, I'm going to rate this a coal for its portability. And for its features, it does hold a lot of watercolor. It is a travel palette. You could just bring this technically with a sketchbook and do a painting. So I have to grudgingly give it a bronze. Overall, I would rate this palette a bronze. If you want an all-in-one palette, save your money. That's just my opinion. And I know a lot of people are going to argue with me in the comments. And I have friends who love this palette and are completely devoted to it, but it's not the palette for me. These are the 2 other all-in-one palettes that I have, and they're very similar, so I'm going to talk about them together. This one is made by Whiskey Painters, and this one is made by Schmincke. The size on these is pretty much the same, and so is the weight. The Schmincke comes in at 173 grams, and the Whiskey palette comes at 178, but that's because I have a brush in it. And that's without water. So it will weigh a little bit more if you put some water in it. This is not the kind of palette that you'd probably want to attach to a travel easel, but if you did want to, it is magnetic and it would hold, although it makes your mixing well dip down quite a lot. So I probably wouldn't recommend it. And the same goes for this one. The Whiskey Painters is the original of this model. It has a thumb ring or a finger ring on the back, and it has a lid that you can take off, and it reveals the cap, which is brass, and it opens up to your water reservoir, or if you want to put whiskey in there, you could do that as well. It's called the Whiskey Painters palette for a reason. And then it's very similar from there to the Cornelissen palette that I showed you earlier. So you lift the lid, you have 2 deep mixing wells, and then you have a spot for 8 paints on the sides. You can add 4 more in the center if you want, or you can put some travel brushes there. And this one does come with a travel brush. They also have these channels that you can remove, and that way you can replace the colors or move them around. And then this holds them into place so they don't shift when you're painting. And then this lid is your water container. So you would fill it up, and then you'd come over to this side, and it has a notch here, and it attaches to the side of the palette. So you can hold the palette in one hand and paint, and it's beautifully made. If you want an all-in-one palette, this would be the one that I would recommend that you get. You only have 2 mixing wells as compared to the 3 on the Winsor & Newton, but they're proper mixing wells. They're deep, and you'll be able to mix a variety of different colors here, and you can also hold up to 12 colors. I don't use this one as much as I probably should, mostly because I just have other ones that I'm in love with. But I would rate this one for its features. If you want an all-in-one palette, I would rate this as a gold. Portability, it's a little bit heavier, so I'd probably move it into the silver category. But overall, I would rate this one as a silver gold. And they do have other models if you're interested in that. They come empty and you put your own paints inside. Now, if I compare that to the Schmincke, you would think that they would be equal, but there is a big problem with my Schmincke palette. So it has the same lid. It's possibly made in the same place. I don't really know how that works with manufacturing. It again has a very similar reservoir with the brass lid, and you can keep your water in there. And then it opens up and it has the same 2 mixing wells. You might be able to see the problem with mine. Something happened shortly after I bought it, and this is when it was stored empty. I did not have water in it, but it completely bowed. You can see that the paints are at an angle here because somehow this reservoir that holds the water swelled. And if I compare it to the whiskey painters, you can see how it's supposed to look. Those paints are supposed to look flush, but in my Schmincke, they're tilted. Also, because of that, the lid doesn't close. I have tried to get it to close, but it just doesn't anymore. And this was not a cheap purchase. It did come with the Schmincke paints, so that's worth something. But for the price, you're better off putting your own paints in a whiskey painter's palette and getting that one. And I believe that if you did have some kind of a problem with it, they're such a nice, small, honorable company that I think that they would work with you on it. The lid barely fits on the top anymore. I can just about jam it on there. So because of that, this palette is a coal. I wish that I could send it back, but I don't have the receipt anymore. So save your money, buy the Whiskey Painter's palette. This was a special white matte edition that I got, but it also comes in black, either matte or gloss. Just to recap, these 4 are the big losers of all of my travel watercolor palettes. I will never bring any of these traveling, and I wouldn't recommend that you purchase any of them if you have a choice to purchase something else. And these are my winners, and the ones that you will probably see me traveling with either by land or by sea in the near and the distant future. Let me know in the comments which ones you like the best, and if you disagree with me about any of the ones, I would love to hear it. Again, everybody has different preferences and different tastes, and this is just my opinion based on my experience. Thank you so much for your time. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and leave me a comment because I do read all of my comments and I try to reply. I hope you all have a beautiful day with many happy travel painting adventures ahead of you. If you'd like to see a video just about the tiny palettes, you can click here. If you'd like to see about the art toolkit palettes, you can click here. And if you'd like to see a dedicated video about the Etcher Mini palette, you can click here. And happy painting!